deciding I had no other options that would save me from yet another horribly embarrassing emotional episode, I darted up the staircase. I could still hear Mike behind me calling my name, so I kept running down the hall of the second story. I reached the last door there and attempted to open it, only to find it locked. I then noticed another set of stairs likely leading to the top floor of the house, so I raced my way up them and kept running until I was met with a wall.
Bella, where did you go?
Mike called from the bottom of the stairs. His voice was slurred, verifying my suspicions about his drinking. Panicking again at his quickly approaching voice, I located the only door I could see and tried the handle. Unlocked. I flung the door open and slammed it as quietly as I could in my alarmed state and leaned my forehead against it. I was panting and lightly shaking by now, and I worked to steady my breaths with my eyes closed while listening intently to see if I could still hear Mike. My shaking hand was still on the knob, so I took a moment to lock the door and backed away from it slightly. When I didn't hear anything on the other side of the door, I let out a deep sigh of relief and closed my eyes. Just then, someone in the room behind me cleared their throat. I jumped around and hit my back against the door, making a surprised squeaking sound, and instinctively brought my hand up to my mouth. There, sitting Indian style in a large four-poster bed, was a guy who looked to be around my age. He had the strangest shade of disheveled bronze hair, a very pale complexion, much like mine, and startling green eyes that had very dark circles under them and were severely bloodshot. He looked almost as tired as I felt, but he was very beautiful. Yes, beautiful. It was one of those moments where I wished I could get closer to someone of the male gender, because he was very good-looking, almost inhumanly so. But he was sitting there looking at me expectantly with his eyebrows raised. I was stunned in silence for a moment before I realized this must be his room, and I was being very intrusive. "Oh my, I'm so sorry. I hadn't no idea. I was just trying," I stammered, trying unsuccessfully to explain my presence. I let out a deep breath and shuffled my feet uncomfortably, looking everywhere but in his eyes.
"Oh, no, it's not a problem, really. I have girls busting into my bedroom to have weird random emotional breakdowns all the time."
He smirked. "Weird random emotional breakdowns?" I thought bitterly. "You have no idea." I put on my best apologetic face and tried to explain more coherently. My heart was still beating furiously, and I was still slightly shaking from the surprise of finding this stranger here, but I tried my best to explain. I was just trying to get away from this guy that was following me, and I ran up the stairs, but the door I tried was locked, so I ran up the stairs more, and he was still coming behind me, so I came in here. I babbled on in a high-pitched voice. I paused, trying to decipher his expression, which appeared to be amused. I took in a deep breath to calm myself, and let it out slowly. "Please, excuse me for disturbing you," I finished sincerely. I turned to leave without his response, but heard a voice on the other side of the door that made my hand freeze on the doorknob.
"Bella."
I could hear Mike yelling at the hallway. I stood there for a moment, hearing him repeating my name, before I turned around slowly to the guy on the bed, who was looking at the door with equal amounts of frustration and amusement.
"You're hiding from Newton?"
he said as more of a statement than a question. I met his deep, tired green eyes, and nodded slowly. He chuckled then. It was a soft, musical sound that temporarily distracted me from the rather awkward situation unfolding before me. I was very uncomfortable being in a strange guy's bedroom, beautiful or not, but I couldn't go back out in the hall, where Mike was waiting. I decided I could leave and confront a very drunk and forward Mike Newton, or stay here until he leaves and take my chances with this stranger. Given the choice between the two, I made up my mind. I started, begging him with my eyes, "Would you mind? If I waited here until Mike leaves?" I asked in a whisper, biting on my bottom lip. His green eyes looked at me, then to the door, and back to me with a furrowed brow. After a moment of indecision, he let out a heavy sigh.
"Yep, fine,"
he said in a defeated tone.
Just don't fuck with anything,"
he warned in a harsh voice. I bobbed my head in a quick nodding motion, while he returned his attention to a sketchbook, or journal of some sort on his lap. While his gaze was averted, I took in the large space that was his bedroom. The bed he was sitting on was to my right, about halfway in the room. Across the wall to my left sat a large black leather sofa, with a bookcase on the other end. The wall across the room in front of me had large windows, and a pair of French doors, in the middle, that led out to a patio. The room was slightly cluttered, with a few articles of clothing hung over the couch and bed, and textbooks on the floor, but not horribly so.
"So what's your name?"
His velvety voice broke me out of my visual exploration. I turned to see him, his brow furrowed slightly, concentrating on a book in his lap, pencil moving back and forth in a sweeping motion. "Bella Swan," I answered quietly. He nodded, but didn't look up from his lap. I waited for him to give me his name, but he didn't. "What's yours?" I asked, fidgeting awkwardly with the sleeves of my hoodie.
"Edward Cullen,"
he answered distractedly.
"Edward's point of view." I looked up from my sketchbook to see her fiddling with her sleeves and looking around awkwardly. I took her momentary distraction to really look at her. She had long brown hair, of course, but I already knew that. She had on the same outfit from school today. Her hood was still up, trying to hide her face. But I could actually see it now. She was attractive, I suppose. At least her face was. But I couldn't really get past her eyes. They had wide, dark circles underneath them, and they looked flat, sad, tired. She looked almost as tired as I felt. Which is not fucking possible, I thought, remembering her nap in bio this afternoon. "You can't sit down, do you know?" I said with raised eyebrows, nodding my head at the sofa. She met my gaze for a moment, and then hesitantly made her way to the wall across from my bed, where my couch was located. When she sat, she brought her knees up to her chest, and hugged them. I cringed, seeing her dirty, wet shoes on my new leather couch. "If you're going to get all fucking fetal on my $5,000 couch, at least have the decency to take off your shoes," I snapped. Her eyes widened for a moment, before she shot up off the couch, and began rubbing frantically at the spot her shoes were touching.
"Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I wasn't even thinking. I'm sorry,"
she kept apologizing, while still rubbing the seat. She apologizes way too fucking much. I almost felt guilty for saying anything in the first place. "It's fine. Really, don't worry about it," I sighed. She stopped her hands and stood up straight, inspecting the couch. Once she seemed satisfied my Italian leather hadn't been harmed, she sat back down, this time with her feet on the floor. I returned my attentions back to my sketch for a few minutes. When I looked back up, Ella was still in her spot, but seemed to be inspecting the bookcase beside the couch with interest and longing. "Did she like to read? Do you like books?" I asked aloud. Her head snapped towards me and nodded slowly, a light red creeping up her cheeks, embarrassed I had caught her ogling my literature. I mentally chuckled. "You can look, if you'd like," I said, pointing at my bookshelf. Her eyes lit up a little, and she stood up slowly, and made her way to the bookshelf, eyes roaming the titles. I had acquired a rather extensive collection since I moved here. Carlisle was never apprehensive about buying me books. Bella's hand reached out like she wanted to grab one, but she stopped suddenly, and turned towards me.
"May I?"
she asked quietly, pointing to a book. I waved my hand in a gesture that said by all means. She took a book from the shelf, and opened it, running her hand down the page reverently. Yes, she does like books, I decided. She moved back to her spot on the couch, and began reading. I couldn't see which book it was, but she looked very much immersed in it, so I returned to sketching. It was a comfortable silence for a long while, the only sounds coming from the loud party below us, my pencil moving on the paper, and the pages of Bella's book being turned. She never looked up from the book she was reading, and I got so caught up in my sketch that I realized almost 2 hours had passed by the time I finished. I looked at her then. She looked peaceful reading the book, and even though it was very large she appeared to already be halfway through it. She also looked so tired,